Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be changing gears a little bit from the DLC discussions we've been having about the Slaanesh DLC to focus on important changes coming to the game in the near future. Of course, being Total War Warhammer that I'm talking about. Before Creative Assembly left for the holidays, they made a mention of how the factions from Shadow of Change would be a high priority in 2025. For adjustments, anyway. Most likely, this is going to revolve around some really serious in-depth reworks for Kislev, alongside smaller but still notable changes for Grand Cathay and Tzeentch. I have spent the last several weeks combing through the game for inspiration on how to tackle the monolith that is the Kislev rework in particular. We'll discuss Tzeentch and Cathay in their own videos, but I want to take on the colossal frostworm that is the motherland first and foremost. Before we delve into my personal recommendations on how to improve Kislev, let's take a moment to examine the problematic elements of the factions. Note that I'll address Mother Ostankya specifically in a separate part at the end of the last of these videos, because to make my editor not go insane, the poor bastard, I'm going to split these up into smaller videos that focus on specific topics instead of just dumping a big Kislev Rework video that has a bunch of bookmarks. We're going to instead kind of break it apart a little bit. So most Ostankya will be in the last one. To keep things on pace, I'll be addressing a particular mechanics issue, then starting how I'd recommend solving them. So each video will focus on one or a couple of different issues and the proposed solutions. Starting with the overall Kislevite systems, we have the rather infamous supporter race. This mechanic is used by Katarin, Kostaltyn, and Boris Ursus. The way this system functions is that Katarin and Kostaltyn build up supporters through the methods such as building Orthodox church structures, doing special events, and accomplishing certain goals while invocations are active. These supporters can also be lost through rare events and by attacking other Kislevite factions. If the player reaches 600 supporters before the rival faction in question, they will immediately confederate them. Furthermore, there are thresholds of supporters at 50, 100, 200, and 400 that, when achieved, grant buffs to control, leadership, and speed, and diplomacy with other Kislevite factions. Finally, the player, even when the player is Boris Ursus, can spend resources to either, in Boris's case, he can spend supporters to essentially give them to the faction of his choice. So you can either give supporters to Katarin or give supporters to Kostaltyn. But if you're playing as Katarin or Kostaltyn, you can hurt your opponent's number of supporters by spending devotion or money to drop it by 50, with each of those methods having a separate 20-turn cooldown. So, with all that said, the supporter race has a couple of issues with its current implementation. In the original Total War Warhammer 3 release, which we know is the Realms of Chaos campaign, the supporter race featured relatively well, with the AI very aggressively building up its own meter, and it was very possible for the player to just lose the race. However, in Immortal Empires, this is almost never the case. Kislev is a ruthless starting position, and the AI factions tend to struggle rather immensely or just be completely wiped out. Oftentimes, even the rival faction will be wiped out utterly before the player can get to the final level of the supporter race. So when they get to the point where they should confederate, like say you're playing Katarin, instead of being able to confederate Kostaltyn at 600 supporters, he might just be dead, in which case you don't really get anything that exciting. There's nothing you can do at that point. Furthermore, if you are beaten to the end by the AI, it sort of feels like Creative Assembly didn't think very much about what should happen after that, because the game prevents you from declaring war on your rival faction, and if you lose the race, you also can't confederate them. So you just can't do anything. You could like make them a military ally, and that's the best it's gonna get. It's a very bizarre system. So, and I don't like that because it removes a lot of player agency even once they finish interacting with the mechanic. Furthermore, the buffs for the supporter bar filling up are pretty unnoticeable to the majority of players. They're not terrible in and of themselves. All those things are good to have. Speed is nice, control is nice, better diplomacy is nice, all that stuff. However, it isn't attention grabbing. It's a very passive, subtle force in the background that the vast majority of players are never, ever going to notice. And to me, that signifies that while the mechanic may have a function, it's not a good function. Finally, the supporters are a resource that you build up over the course of the campaign, as we spoke about earlier. But once you've finished the end of the supporter race and you've reached 600 supporters, they are useless. They don't do anything for the rest of the campaign. You kind of would continue to earn them, essentially, but the cap is 600, so that entire function just collapses and proceeds to do absolutely nothing for you. So that wraps up the really problematic concerns with the supporter race. But how can we address them? The first thing I would recommend right off the bat is that this mechanic should only exist between Kostaltyn and Katarin. Boris Ursus is running around in the Chaos Waste trying to snub Archaon and his daughter's ex before they can build up enough momentum to crash down into Kislev. It doesn't make a lot of sense for him to be influencing the political upheaval taking place back in the motherland with how distant he is to it. We will discuss replacement mechanics for him that I feel pretty good about in a later video. With the Red Tsar removed from the equation, that leaves us with the civil dispute between the Great Orthodoxy and the Ice Court. On the surface, I think this is an excellent concept that should be salvaged, providing Kislev with this uniquely adversarial relationship in their homeland that isn't meant to be solved by simply kicking in the opposition with force. I even think that the current UI of the supporter race doesn't really need to change, as we'll discuss. So, my recommendations are as follows. I would say keep the supporter bar as it is, visually, where there are 5 thresholds to be reached at the, I think it was 50, 100, 200, 400, and 600. However, at each threshold, in addition to the current buffs and the goodies you get from the quest that's like, oh, be the first one to reach this, and you get some bonus money and kind of you might get like a half decent item, there should be an additional bonus given to each one. So there are several different methods that could be taken to add fun little rewards for reaching these rewards before the other your rival does. First up, we could do unique lords. So similar to the ones found on the tech tree for the Greenskins, the Vampire Coast, and the Tomb Kings. Maybe, for instance, there's a special Boyar or a special Ice Switch or unique Druzina that have completely unique traits. And if you're the first one to reach the appropriate threshold, you add this character into your pool and they make for a fun, powerful character that has kind of a unique gimmick. Or perhaps we could include genuinely unique ancillaries and items. I'm not talking about, oh, that's a nice blue item. I mean a purple item or a one-of-a-kind ancillary or banner or whatever that can only be acquired through this method. So a one-of-a-kind goodie to equip on your lords and heroes to really, really incentivize you to get to these points. Another option we could do might be that if you're the first to reach a threshold, each threshold triggers a unique dilemma. These could be events that offer the player a variety of choices that, depending on what you choose, will give you buffs that help you lean into a certain playstyle to dramatically alter the course of your campaign or allow you to be extremely proficient at focusing on some kind of thing. So, for instance, if you reach the first buff first, maybe you get a dilemma that says, oh, hey, do you want to get bonus growth faction-wide? Or would you get, like, for a good 5 turns? Like, imagine if it's like plus 20 to plus 50 growth faction-wide for 5 turns. Or you could say, oh, do you want like plus 50 to 100 tech for 5 turns to allow you to get like a big oomph through the tech tree? And each of these little points could have a different dilemma, with the dilemmas becoming more powerful, or the options that you could choose becoming more powerful. Or maybe one's like, oh, you could give buffs to these kinds of units for several turns. Or you could unlock some kind of powerful ability for several turns, stuff like that. The last one that comes to mind that they could also do would be adding in campaign exclusive regiments of renown, just like from Ikiclaw's workshop. So on those thresholds through the supporter race, as you reach them, you unlock access to a specialized unit for the Kislevite roster that's a fun regiment of renown. So like the first one could be a regiment of renown Kossars with spears, and then the second one could be a regiment of renown ice lynx, and then the third one could be a regiment of renown Griffin Legion or something. But you know, campaign exclusive, but just like Ikiclaw's workshop, they just add more fun tools to play around with. So to make this race, I think, feel like it matters, really matters. That way the player isn't just ignoring it. You want the supporter race to be like, oh yeah, this is your early game, your early to mid game. This is your focus, in addition to, you know, just trying not to die and keeping the baddies out of Kislev. So I would suggest making sure that this remains that only one faction can get these buffs, and it's whoever gets there first. This would heavily incentivize players to prioritize the feature instead of just ignoring it until they happen to fill it up. Considering that, I would personally recommend really going with a mixture of items, ancillaries, and when I say ancillaries, I mean like the little followers and banners you can equip in those little slots beneath your items, and campaign-only regiments of renown. Those would be the 3 things. So like 1 or 2 purple items, one super powerful unique banner, 1 super powerful unique follower, and 2 regiments of renown, for instance. And I would maybe do it like the first one gives you the banner, the second one gives you an item, the third one gives you a ancillary, the fourth one gives you a regiment of renown, and I think there's only 5. And then the 5th one would give you like another regiment of renown and the Confederation. But I would not complain if they added several rewards to each block. So, maybe all 5 of them give you a regiment of renown. So you get 5 new campaign exclusive regiments of renown, in addition to maybe 1 or 2 purple items and 2 to 3 ancillaries, which are a mixture of followers and banners. Speaking of that Confederation threshold, which would be the final one, it does need some slight adjustments. It should be changed to function like the Book of Grudges for the dwarfs, in my opinion, where if the faction is still alive, then you confederate as normal. However, if your rival faction has been utterly destroyed, then when you complete the supporter race, you are able to immediately resurrect the dead legendary lord from that faction and add them to yours at whatever level they were at, with, you know, their unique items if they've unlocked them. So for instance, if you were playing as Kostaltyn and by turn 30, Katarin has been killed off by swarms of Skaven and Azhag and Chaos Dwarfs, you get to the end of the supporter race, you would immediately unlock Katarin at whatever level she died at, and she's got no skill points, so you're able to do whatever you want with her and all that stuff, and hey, congratulations, that's your big reward, you got access to Katarin. That way it still feels really exciting, regardless if the rival faction is alive or not, when you get to that final tick. The other thing that would be good about this is that this also would prevent the system from being a feels bad ban if the AI is consistently beating you to the rewards. Because at first it would suck that the AI is beating you to the rewards because they're getting access to the items and the ancillaries and the unique units that you want access to. But once you get to the final threshold and confederate them, you then immediately gain access to all of those things because now they're a part of your roster. So now you have access to the Regiment of Renown. You have access to the unique items and the banners and all the other stuff. So although they might beat you to it, that doesn't mean that you forever lose access to it. It just means that you have to confederate with them in order to then acquire that access. To go along with that, I would further suggest that if the player loses the race to the final threshold, that once they lose the race, the AI gets to the final threshold. Obviously, the AI cannot confederate the player. So what I would recommend is that the player is punished in the sense that they cannot confederate or declare war on the rival faction until they also get to the final threshold, kind of representing that they've built up enough support within Kislev that they are able to initiate a civil war or just go through the normal confederation method in order to get their grubby paws on that AI faction. Now, should you choose to declare war, this would cause all hell to break loose and be very heavily punished through the devotion system. Because declaring war on a Kislevite faction comes with a huge devotion penalty, and every time you attack a Kislevite faction, like in a battle or something, it should come with penalties to your devotion as well. So if you end up being like, okay, well, he beat me in the supporter race, you're playing Kataryn and say, oh, Kostaltyn beat me in the supporter race, he owns half of Kislev, I own the other half, but I've now reached the max level, so I can declare war on him. And you know what? Screw him. I don't want to deal with confederating through diplomacy, so I'm going to attack him, and I'm going to force him to join my side by just beating him into submission. If you choose to do that, you would lose a big chunk of devotion right at the start, and then I think you should lose like a good 10 to 20 devotion every time you attack a fellow Kislevite faction, so that it your devotion just crashes and burns, which means you're not going to be able to use any of your invocations. You're not going to be able to, you're going to have a lot of chaos incursions because your devotion is going to be negative, and you're going to have some issues. You know, it will be truly the ramifications of a civil war in Kislev. I would also add that if you have negative devotion, it really should come with some penalties like minus control, minus leadership, and some other things, because all hell is breaking loose in the country. Lastly, the supporters, I believe, need to have some sort of function after you've reached the maximum threshold of 600. So something that I could think of is that maybe for every 50 or 100 supporters you get beyond the maximum, it triggers a dilemma where you're given 4 options on how you can spend the influence of your supporters. So you're at 600, you've already confederated the AI, and you're just doing your invocations, and you built your orthodoxy buildings and all this stuff. And let's say it's 100. So once you hit 700 supporters, it's not doing anything on your meter anymore, but at 700, it triggers an event that says, hey, you've garnered up enough support that you may now spend 100 supporters who are going to give you some kind of buff. So maybe they could give you a fat buff faction-wide to improving growth or income or recruitment ranks, stuff like that. And it lasts for like 5 turns, let's say. The only thing that would be a little tricky about it is you would have to make sure the number is big enough that if the player is building a ton of orthodoxy buildings, like it would need to have a cooldown. That's what it would really be. It would need to have a global campaign cooldown so the player doesn't break it, because if you built orthodoxy buildings in just every single region on the map, and you're painting the map, you could easily trigger that like multiple times per turn, every turn, which would probably break the game. So it would probably need to be something like it can only happen a maximum of once every 2 to 4 turns or something, 2 to 5 turns maybe. So maybe like once you activate a buff using the supporter system, you can't choose another buff until that one wears off. And once it wears off, it then is you're able to trigger the dilemma again if you have enough excess supporters. So that actually brings me to the end of my discussion on the supporter race. We're going to try something a little different with these, like I kind of mentioned earlier, where I'm going to record these in chunks. So this video is purely dedicated to the supporter race and kind of introducing some of the main issues with Kislev. Next video, we're going to talk about devotion, and that's going to include a discussion on how devotion should work with chaos incursions. and as well as the Invocations of the Motherland. And then the video after that, we're going to talk about the ice training system and how it should be personalized to each of the different characters. So we'll have a video dedicated to ice training and talk about all the things that come with that. And then the video after that will be us talking about the Ottomans. And then either in that one or the one after that one, we'll then hop into unique Lord effects. So we'll do a video on Katerin, maybe with the Ottoman, and then the video after that might be like Kostaltyn and Boris. And then we'll have a final video that is about, what's the last thing I talked about? Oh yeah, the tech tree, and then some other little things with like Mother Ostankia and things like that. So we're going to try and have this kind of be a series of like 5 to 6 videos. So do be sure to let me know if you're like, hey, this is nice. I prefer these more bite-sized videos. That way I can kind of like show up, watch it, and move on with my day. Or if you're like, oh, damn it. No, this sucks. I hate this. I would much rather watch like the whole topic in one big video with timestamps. So, give me that hour-and-a-half long video on reworks for the various factions. Though this one is going to be considerably longer than the Tzeentch and Cathay ones, which are going to be much, much shorter. But yeah, so that wraps up part 1 of us talking mostly about the supporter race. So do be sure to let me know what you think. And I'll see you very, very soon to talk about devotion.